Estrella. Ani, my name is Estrella Torrez, and I'm a professor at Michigan State University in the Residential College in the Arts and Humanities, and also faculty in the American Indian and Indigenous Studies program. So as Becky said, she contacted me one night at 11 o'clock and said, I'm very disturbed about what I'm seeing happening, and I feel frustrated, like many of us did, when we were seeing the very violent imagery that we were seeing, right? And almost beyond shock. It was appalling to see that these things were happening, and that the media, the large media, CNN, the larger corporations weren't really covering it. What we were seeing was mostly on Facebook, and I think people were just in shock. And so, Becky said, I don't know what to do, and I'd like to be there, and I don't know how that's going to happen. And then she went to work that night and called me about 20 minutes later and said, my plant is closed down for the next 5 days. Can you get a van and donations and a route together in 3 hours? I said, sure, let's do it. And so luckily, I was able to pull together some funding of a cargo van with only 2 seats, and about 25 bags of clothing and blankets and food and supplies, and about $400 to $600 in cash to buy supplies on the way. Woo! So the thing that coming out of this is that it really isn't just the Standing Rock Sioux who are committed to this, but it was people from all over. I had friends, giving me money from like New Mexico, California, Florida, Oregon, everywhere. We're asking, I only have $25 right now. I'm like, that's great. That'll buy batteries. That'll buy propane. That'll buy goggles, heat warmer, hand warmers, anything, and everything was appreciated. And one of the things that I took out, Becky mentioned about grandma and auntie, but one of the most moving things that I witnessed there was while we were there, the International Indigenous Youth Council arrived. And a lot of the work I do here in this area is with youth. And they were there. And they took that lesson of forgiveness and they held a ceremony. And they approached, if anybody's been to Standing Rock, they have something called Facebook Hill. It's one place in the whole encampment that gets internet. Yeah. And that's mostly because when the imagery you saw, all of the streaming videos happened, one of the things that Morton County officers did and DAPL did was they decided to slow down the bandwidth so that people couldn't use video. And it was very difficult, right? Because that was something that people were able to use as evidence. And so you had to go up on this very high hill, and there was always about 45, 50, 60, 100 people, with their phones in the sky trying to Facebook. And so we were there one morning, and these youth started coming in. They introduced themselves as, the International Indigenous Youth Council, and they said, we're having a small ceremony, a silent prayer, and we're inviting you, we'd like you to come. And what they assumed would only be about 20 to 30 people to arrive, 400 to 500 people attended their ceremony, held completely by the youth. And what they asked was for us to pray for the DAPL workers. They said, because if this water is poisoned, it doesn't just poison our families, it poisons their families as well. And we need to forgive them. And we need to pray that they find some of that peace and love in their hearts and start to believe in humanity and start to believe and behave in a humane way. And they asked us, they instructed us, they said, this is a silent prayer. We're going to walk to the barricade in silence, in complete silence, and we're going to sit at the barricade and we're going to sit there in prayer in complete silence. And to tell you, that terrified the DAPL workers, because there were 40 vehicles of police officers that were lining the street on the other side of the barricade, And to see 400 people show up in complete silence, kneel and sit in complete silence and bow their head in prayer in complete silence was absolutely amazing. And to see that completely led by the youth was even more impactful. And the youth took the water. They had prayed over some water, much like what we saw here. They had the earlier that morning, the women elders held a water ceremony, and they took some of. They asked if they could have some. The youth asked if they could have some of that water to take and present to the DAPL workers, and asked them and to share in that prayer and that water that they had over. They had a ceremony with, and they offered that water to them. And none of the workers took that water, save for one. He took that water, and he didn't drink it, but he put it on his body, and he said, "Thank you." And what we did find later that afternoon is one officer submitted his resignation. So really this is about prayer and ceremony. It isn't about anger. This is a very frustrating situation, yes. But we cannot come at this from an angry point of view, in a violent point of view, because what will happen is we will only create more anger and violence. And that's not what's needed here. And so I walked away from that and thinking, I've never been one to say that youth are future leaders, because I believe that youth are leaders now. They are the ones that are leading us into these places and coming at it with a good heart, and we need to follow them. And so that was a perfect example right there and then. These four youth led 400 to 500 people in silent prayer, and were able to change the heart of one individual who was in riot gear. That to me is amazing, and that is a memory, and that I will always have with me, and will keep me and move me forward in this work, because as we know, this is a small victory. Let's not forget to celebrate these moments, right? This is a small victory, and there is so much more work to be done. So this is a small victory. We need to celebrate these moments, but there's so much more work to be done, right? And so we have to keep that as we move forward. And the other thing that I want to make note is, while we were there, one of the things that the auntie said one morning was that 460 tribes had signed a treaty to protect the water. They had signed treaties with the Sioux that they would protect water on their own lands. 416 tribal communities, right? So that's amazing. This really is so much larger. This water issue is impacting us here in Michigan. We heard Line 5. We have Flint, where multiple generations of people have been poisoned and will continue to deal with that poisoning. We have Detroit, where water is turned off. Water is an issue here in Michigan as well. We have to find a way to keep these connections, maintain these connections, and work together, because we will only continue to build stronger and stronger relationships if we move forward as one. So one of the things that was said often, and I'm sure you've heard it said, was Mini Wachoni, which means water is life. So that is something that would just often be yelled, there was, Becky said, there was this, kind of like an MC, and just randomly at 4 o'clock in the morning to wake you up, he would yell, "Mini Wachoni!" at 4 o'clock in the morning, and then at 12:30 at night, and then all throughout the day. And people would and then from all over camp of 8,500 people, you would just hear that chant all the way back. So it's quite a wake-up call, right? Mini Wachoni, what a wake-up call. Mini Wachoni!